Apple recently announced that Final Cut Pro is coming to the iPad, and while this might be exciting news for some of you might be left thinking, well, I don't own an iPad, I don't plan on buying an iPad, why should I care? There are a few reasons why you should care, and in this video I'm going to go over them. Let's have a look. First off, when you look at the interface here, it looks really nice. You'll be able to import footage from your camera roll, and you'll be able to record on the iPad directly into Final Cut Pro. It almost makes me wonder if we're going to see a gimbal for the iPad. That would look ridiculous, but I guess it's not out of the realm of possibilities. But overall, it looks very familiar, and if you're familiar with Final Cut Pro on macOS, it should be really easy to just open the app and start editing. Because as we know, Apple likes things to be intuitive, and I'm pretty sure that's going to be the case with the Final Cut Pro app on the iPad. The little jog wheel on the right-hand side here is really nice. You'll probably be able to scrub through footage that way, trim clips, move clips around. So I think that's going to be a really useful tool to edit quickly. And another thing that stands out, which I quite like, is the little icons on the different audio rolls. We have a microphone for dialogue, a little waveform for effects, and a little music note for all the music tracks. It looks like you'll be able to access the iPad version of the inspector window down here. You can access the volume, add keyframes, and there's a section for multicam editing. Now here comes the part that a lot of people are going to hate. It's a subscription model, which means you have to pay $4.99 per month or $49 annually to use the app.
You what?
And I know a subscription is going to turn a lot of people away from Final Cut Pro, probably in the direction of something like DaVinci Resolve, especially if this is a sign of things to come and Apple decides to go this route for a future update of Final Cut Pro on macOS. I certainly hope that's not the case, but only time will tell. The iPad app will be available from the 23rd of May, so that's really soon. Here's the interface in action, and you can see that little jog wheel being used there to move the clip, and it also looks like it works really well with the Apple Pencil. You can also use the pencil to do live drawings. That's pretty cool. You can draw directly on top of your footage, and then Final Cut Pro will automatically animate that for you. It will be interesting to see if you can take those animations you've created on the iPad and hand those off to the macOS version of Final Cut Pro. You're also able to work in an HDR workflow, which is really nice because the iPad Pro's display is fantastic. And for people who are moving from iMovie, you can import those projects as well. So that's really, really cool. We've spoken about the pencil, but you can also use a Magic Keyboard or Smart Keyboard Folio to further increase your editing speed because you'll be able to use a lot of keyboard shortcuts. I also think that will make it a lot easier to switch between the macOS version and the iPad version if you kind of work in both, if you'd like to have dual workflows. I think it's really cool that they've added multi-camera editing into the app, and it looks like you'll be able to sync up to 4 camera or audio sources. Then when it comes to switching angles, you'll probably just tap these angles and it'll switch. Much like the multicam editor in the macOS version of Final Cut Pro, you can simply play back your edit and click on the different angles in the multicam viewer to switch angles. You'll also be able to edit angles in the angle editor, which allows you to fine-tune sync and to change the order of those clips in the multicam editor. And this is where things get really exciting for macOS users who don't plan on using Final Cut Pro on the iPad, because Apple's introducing something they call fast cut automation, which allows you to accelerate time-consuming editing tasks that leverage the power of Apple Silicon and machine learning. And I think this is only the beginning of Apple using machine learning to give us new features. And these features that you see in the iPad are likely to make their way over to the macOS version of the app. The reason I say that is if you scroll all the way down on this page, you'll see that Final Cut Pro 10.6.6 or later is required, which I assume is to hand off from the iPad version to the macOS version. And we're currently on Final Cut Pro 10.6.5, which means this update that's coming out is likely to have a lot of these fast cut features. The most exciting one, in my opinion, is the scene removal mask. It looks like you can just drag and drop an effect onto a clip and instantly remove the background. Now that was a white background in the example, but if you look at Apple's promo video, you'll see they did it with a more complicated subject and background, and apparently the isolation of the subject from the background was perfect.
That's a great key.
Which possibly means no need for green screen and no need for rotoscoping. And if that came to the macOS version, that would be a game changer. Another cool feature is auto crop, which allows you to intelligently adjust footage for vertical or square aspect ratios. Now, the macOS version of Final Cut Pro has something similar called Smart Conform, where you can simply select your clips, go over to modify, hit smart conform, and Final Cut Pro will analyze the timeline and decide where to crop that footage. I assume that because this feature is being introduced into the iPad version of the app, we might see some machine learning type improvements in the smart conform feature in the macOS version, but only time will tell. Then we also have voice isolation on the iPad app, which we already have in the macOS version, and I did a video all about voice isolation. If you'd like to check that out, I'll leave a link down below. It looks like they're going to have titles, transitions, and effects included in the app, which is really cool. It looks like there are going to be some new ones as well. And then we've got some effects which look like filters that you can add to create some really nice looks. If you're shooting on the go and you just need to apply a cool look to something and pop it up on social media, these effects come in really handy. And then under music, what they say here is you can add a professional soundtrack that intelligently adjusts to the length of your video. And I really hope that that's similar to Premiere Pro's remix tool, which allows you to just extend an audio track to the length of your video, and then Premiere Pro will automatically loop sections of that track to make that music last for that duration. If we take a closer look at the interface here, it looks like there are some royalty-free music options in the library. That's my guess, but hopefully that's a feature that applies to any music that you drop into your project. They also have some cool backgrounds, and if you're doing some isolating using the scene removal mask, that could come in really handy. And then third-party content coming soon. And I recognize this is from Motion VFX. So it'll be really cool to see third-party plugin providers being able to put their plugins onto the iPad. I'm not sure how it's going to work yet, but if I can get my free and paid transition packs onto the iPad, then I'll do that. If you didn't already know about my free whip, pan, and zoom transition pack, then go ahead and download that using the link down below. If you're planning on shooting with the iPad, then the iPad version of Final Cut Pro has a bunch of really cool features to help you get great footage. So you can capture in ProRes, which is pretty cool. And it looks like you can change things like the white balance, do slow motion, put the flash on if you need a bit of extra light. You also have some monitoring tools for audio levels for external microphones, and you can turn on exposure indicators and grid lines, so that's really nice. You can obviously shoot in ProRes all the way up to 4K 60, so that's really nice. And then it looks like you save the footage directly into the project. If you're going to be shooting 4K 60 ProRes footage a lot, you'll probably want to get an iPad with a lot of storage, at least 512 gigs, maybe even a terabyte. Then Apple talks about advanced features for pro workflows, and it looks like you can do log processing, you can process raw footage, you can color grade footage as well and use LUTs. You also have the ability to keyframe things like volume, and hopefully they allow us to customize the easing of the keyframes a bit more, and then obviously hopefully that's something that moves over to the macOS version of the app as well. We also have cinematic mode. So if you're shooting on cinematic mode on the iPhone, you can change the focus, and then you're able to share your files directly from the app. I like the fact that we have the option to send to Mac so that you can do more advanced color grading, object tracking, and other things like that. Hopefully they'll port some of those features from the Mac version over to the iPad version, because if you start a project on the iPad and you need to do a bit of tracking, you don't necessarily want to whip out the MacBook just so that you can finish a project. It would be nice to do everything all in one place on the iPad. Apple also mentions which iPads will be compatible with Final Cut Pro, so make sure you check that out to see if your iPad will work, or to make sure that you buy the right iPad if you're planning on buying one. In conclusion, I think this is really exciting news for Final Cut Pro users, even if you don't have an iPad or you don't plan on buying an iPad, because it shows, at least to me, that Apple is taking Final Cut Pro seriously and they're putting money, time, and resources behind developing Final Cut Pro. Yes, it's only an iPad app we're talking about right now, but I do think a lot of those features will come to a future update in a macOS version. Now, I know the subscription thing is going to turn a lot of people off Final Cut Pro, especially if they bring the subscription model to the macOS version of the app. I think that will cause a lot of people to jump ship and go to another editing app. And my thoughts on that are, if you use Final Cut Pro to make a living like I do, then $5 or $10 a month is worth it in order to generate an income. But if you're using Final Cut Pro as a hobbyist or for personal projects, then I totally see how a one-time payment is far better than a subscription model. So I hope Apple sticks with the once-off payment model and not the subscription model. But with all that being said, I think it's really positive news, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what you think of the iPad app. Let me know what you think of the future of Final Cut Pro in general, and I'll see you in the next one.